My name's Andre. I'm the director of product for messaging at 8x8. When I say messaging, it's like WhatsApp kind of messaging, instant messaging. There's other types of messaging. Thanks for coming. I thought that my title would draw more, of an audience, but this is all good. So the art of the beam, how to replace the JVM and not get fired. It's a three-part talk. The first part is kind of a really long introduction, which I think is important because it gives you the context for the middle part, which is basically kind of a tutorial of how to win a petty political war. And the third part is essentially how to cement your legacy, once you've won the war. We have to take a pause here and look at 8x8. It's a very interesting company. It's been around since 1987, so it's kind of ancient by Silicon Valley standards. It was founded, it had a different name. We're not going to go into that much detail, but the point here is that it got into VoIP around 1998, 1999 by acquiring a few companies. And then it actually did really well because it created this consumer product for video conferencing. And I met someone at this conference who bought it, who used it in the 90s, an 8x8 consumer video conferencing product because this guy's wife went to Detroit and they had to talk to each other. So mind-blowing. And so things went really well. I think AT&T bought a bunch of product from 8x8 around 2000 or 1999. The stock went way up, and then 2000 happened, and then everyone canceled their contracts. And the company ended up almost being delisted from NASDAQ 3 times. This is according to the chairman of the board, who still works there. It's his first job. He got there in 1990. So if you're interested, you can go interview him. It's fascinating. So today, and then it waited for 12 years right here for cloud to happen. Right? It was just kind of chugging along, selling VoIP services, which is essentially just a cloud telephony, right? And then what happened was all these companies that bought expensive Cisco switches or Avaya switches, they decided to start switching to the cloud, and essentially 8x8 comes in and sells a much cheaper solution that runs a phone in the cloud, very simple. And things are kind of picking up as of the last maybe 7 years or so. I just found this page today. I ended up at 8x8 2 years ago in January of 2017. Because they bought our company. They bought Sameroom, which was our company. And the startup that they bought were actually founded with Peter, who's sitting right here. I thought there'd be like a huge audience and everyone's going to come in and mob Peter, but you can do that later. So everyone who worked at the startup, which was 6 people, ended up at 8x8. So we're all still there, which is kind of a relatively happy result. We raised $4 million over 4 years, and we built 2 products. So it's kind of a symmetry, 2 years and $2 million per product. So it started off with a team messaging service called Cato in January of 2013. Peter and I launched it. We built it over a few weekends. We spent $200. $99 went to the Apple developer license. It was really fun because we got some really good customers right away. For example, Jeff Atwood, who's the co-founder of Stack Overflow, and Discourse was like an early adopter. It was great. Then we got into the Techstars Startup Accelerator in Boulder, Colorado. Then we raised a bunch of money from Brad Feld. So it was really good until Slack launched their public beta 8 months later, and they just started mopping the floor with sort of the space, including Cato. We fought them for a little bit, and then in 2015, we launched our second product called Sameroom, which is a messaging interoperability service. So you can connect a channel in Slack to a group in Skype, to a group in Telegram, channel in IRC, or you can connect them all together. And it was a kind of a easier product to sell. It was more successful. We had no competitors. There was no like major gorilla that emerged out of nowhere. But unfortunately, we empirically proved that the market size of Sameroom is $200,000 a year maximum. That's as much as you can make if you have this product, which is not okay for a venture-backed company. So we made the decision to sell to the highest bidder, and that was 8x8. That's how we ended up there. And so hang on one second. Selling a company is a fascinating process. If you're into stress, if you're into thrillers, certainly recommend it. Sleepless nights. So slide 9. Even though 8x8 and competitors, there's a few people in the space, a few companies in the space, they sell a dial tone service, which is basically you pick up your phone, you hear a dial tone, you make a phone call. You may have a phone at your office, which is powered by 8x8. You would never know, right? So the question is, why would they buy like a messaging startup? And that's because of this, I don't know if you've read this book, Innovator's Dilemma. If you have an existing business, you have to be afraid of someone coming over, or some new technology coming over and just destroying you, wiping you out, right? Which is probably what's going to happen to like gas-fueled vehicles at some point. So they're all scrambling to try to figure this out. For maybe the last 4 years or so, all these old school telecom companies, cloud telephony companies, are thinking that maybe Slack is something, or something like Slack is this next thing that's going to take over telephony. That's the word on the street. And to sort of hedge against being wiped out by something like Slack, what they've all been doing is either building their own thing or acquiring companies in the space. With us, even though we're not a pure team messaging system, they bought our idea of interoperability. They thought it was a good enough thing to just kind of get going with. So when we showed up to 8x8, let me back up. 8x8 spent 5 years building their own team messaging service. So it's put a lot of work into actually getting it done. The latest iteration, there were multiple iterations. The latest was using this thing called Apache Whisper. I don't know how to say it. It was written by a non-English speaker. And it's a Java-based thing that hasn't been maintained in like 15 years. But that's what it was running on. And it had some issues with functionality, with productivity. So for example, there were no rooms. Persistent rooms, there's no search, no file sharing. It didn't really work on phones because of the protocol. So the senior leadership, the executives of 8x8, they knew that they kind of had a problem with their messaging story, right? And that was the decision to go out and try to buy someone in the space, and that's how we ended up there. When executives acquire companies, right? Small companies, small acquisitions, no revenue, very small revenue, they don't really dig into, they don't really know what you're going to be working on, right? The strategy here is that they're essentially making a trivial bet on an investment where you are the investment. And then they sort of take you and throw you in the tank with the sharks, and then they see what happens. Usually it doesn't work. Most investments, they fail. It doesn't matter. They're so small, it's kind of meaningless, but sometimes they work out. And what's interesting, right, by the way, so even though I'm talking about this acquisition, it's not that different from just going to a company. You can go with a friend. We arrived as a team. You can have a team. It doesn't need to be an acquisition. You can. Did it work? Yeah, good. So this is just an example, but you can end up in the same situation just as a regular employee. With an acquisition, the CEO is going to know you and generally wish you well, as opposed to just like a regular employee. They're not going to know you. Small difference, though. So when Peter and I showed up, we sold SameRoom. We could have potentially just kept working on SameRoom, maintaining it, just kind of. And really, this would have looked like resting investing. This is a screenshot from Silicon Valley. These guys are resting investing, right? They're just waiting for their money to vest. What's interesting is that happens a lot, right? So companies get acquired, and then the founders just sit down and chill for a while, right? For like 3-4 years, they chill and then they leave. And so what determines whether that's going to happen or not is your sort of, it's really your standard of ethics, right? So if the founders have the right standard of ethics according to the company, they're going to do something else. And Peter and I happen to have this kind of standard of ethics that didn't allow us to just sit down and chill. So we looked at this Whisper thing, and then we thought we're going to fix it. So we rewrote the 8x8 messaging backend from scratch in Elixir. That's really the really long intro, but I think it's important. 2 years later, this is 2 years later, right? every customer, every 8x8 customer is now using this messaging backend. And actually the company, 8x8, has the capability, there's now a real capability to become a true, real major player in the space. I would not be surprised if somehow it takes on Slack in the next few years. If it doesn't do this, if it screws this up, it's not going to be because of technology. The technology is here, right? So it's a pretty important delta from 2 years ago when we had vSphere. So this is actually an in-house project which was designed to test the back end because we couldn't get the front end people to actually implement. So we built our own thing. It's really nice, but it is in-house, so you can't use it. Maybe if you give us enough money, we could work something out, but you can't actually use it. Yaroslav wrote most of it. He's sitting right here. So as a result of this effort, we actually managed to replace a JVM, a legacy JVM system with an Erlang VM component. We also kind of forced this company that was staunchly pro-colo, right? So it was all in colocations and data centers into the cloud. So now all the new initiatives are being done in AWS or other cloud services. And we also expanded the team from 1 person, which was Peter, to 6, which is mostly right here. 1 person's missing because he's in Russia. So that's, in the process, this was surprisingly hard for us to do, and I'm actually shocked that we succeeded. So we've made a ton of mistakes. We've learned a few things. We've seen some patterns, and kind of the meat of this talk is to share some of that stuff with you guys. I mean, really, what you got to do if you're going to be replacing a JVM component is finding the component to replace, right? And usually, my suggestion is don't look too hard for something to replace, right? It's going to come to you. You'll know. You're going to know what this is. It's going to be like the most horrible thing in the company that's plaguing customers, sales personnel, support, executives, everybody. Everybody knows what it is. It's like this monster. You know, if you can't find one, if your company's working okay, if there isn't really nothing to replace, the suggestion is, and you really want to do something in Elixir, you know, get another job where you can maybe work in Elixir, or you know, join an open source project. Like, if you really don't have a problem to solve, it's pretty hard to do this. So, however, if you have identified your JVM project that you want to rewrite, the last thing you want to do is sort of get up and announce that you're going to be rewriting it in Erlang. Because if you do this, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. You will fail. And there are many reasons why you will fail if you start telling everybody that you're about to rewrite this thing in Erlang. But there's really only one reason that matters. It's because nobody is going to believe you that the reason this JVM thing doesn't work is because it's running on top of the JVM. No one will believe you, right? And remember, we build systems on Beam for a single reason, because it's the right thing to do, right? That's the only reason we do this. And when you try to tell people, when you try to explain to someone that something is the right thing to do, right? You can have the most reassuring, the most rational, reasonable arguments. And you can be talking for a really long time, right? And telling the truth. But all they're going to hear is everything you've ever done during your entire professional career is wrong. So you can be telling the truth, you know, everything, mathematics, but they're hearing everything you've ever done, right? And so what they're going to tell you is that the JVM is industry standard and that it's like enterprise grade. And basically, if you keep trying to preach, what's going to happen is you're going to get fired, right? That's what's going to happen. That's going to be the end result. So don't waste your time trying to convince people to do this. The 2 rules here are don't show, you know, don't tell.
I have a question. Did you ever try to explain this in terms of backend costs?
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? No one's going to believe you.
Cash always matters.
No, I disagree. I think basically, as a general rule, there are exceptions, but nobody's going to believe you, right? You're threatening people's careers. It's a really hard sell. So here's my recipe, right? Number 1, show, don't tell. And number 2, ask for forgiveness, not permission. You just basically, if you know what needs to be done, you just do it. You just do it, right? You just get the thing done, right? And here's why. Here's why you have to do it this way. When you replace a piece of working software at a large company, what you're doing is you're putting people's lives, people's jobs at risk, right? That's what you're actually doing if you're replacing a piece of working software at a company, large company. So this means that regardless of how logical, rational, well-intentioned your initiative may be, you will run into opposition. And unless you demobilize and disarm this opposition, you will get fired, fail and get fired. That's what's going to happen. This is a repeating thing. So you have to be really, really careful. It's not a technical problem. It's not a technical problem. It's a political problem, right? It's kind of like this, at this level of the game, what you have to do is you have to solve a political problem. It's a war, it's a battle, depends, right? Most companies, it's going to be a battle. And the only way to win a political war or a battle is with political leverage. Now, there are two ways to gain political leverage at a large company. The most obvious way, of course, is with a title. If you have the right title, because you've been hired into that title or you were promoted into that title, you don't need a war. You have enough discretion to say, yo, we're rewriting this in Elixir, and no one's going to say anything. Unfortunately, most software engineers don't have those titles. They don't have titles that come with explicit political leverage, right? So this leaves us with the other thing, the other way to gain political leverage within a large organization, and that is getting something done that actually works. It's building something that works, right? Like this guy. And that's how you can gain implicit political leverage, right? So it's not, you don't have the insignia and stuff, but you have political leverage. So making something that works is mostly actually a technical problem. However, you may need to go and talk to other people, right? So there's going to be other teams, there's going to be dependencies. You may have to go and beg someone to build this, just change the API a little bit, add a parameter, put some new event on the bus or whatever. And the best way to do this is to be really nice, to buy drinks, to tell people they're awesome. And the reality is most engineers, right? Most engineers whose jobs you're not directly threatening, they're going to be super helpful, right? They're going to help you because they're, unless they're burnt out, they're going to help you. That's because engineers are nice. Also because that's also the reason why they don't have the right titles, with political leverage. So, and one common thing that's going to happen is people are going to say, well, what are you working on? What are you working on? And the recommendation is, this is a really strong recommendation, is use the word POC. It means proof of concept. If you say POC, they're going to be like, of course, yeah. And then they're also going to think it must have been ordered by someone from above because it sounds kind of legit. And it is legit. That's kind of what you're working on, right? Now, once you've got something that works, okay, and it's working, you've got to be really, really careful with your next steps. This is the most delicate portion of this game because, if you're not careful, fired, potentially. At this stage, right, so you've got something that's working, you've got a working thing, it's so much better, it's so much better. The recommendation is to put together a meeting with the CEO, the CTO, the chairman of the board of directors, the highest executive power you can reach, right, in the company. Set that meeting, do a demo, and your goal here is to reach some sort of agreement where you end up with some what's called air cover, right? Air cover is a technical term for protection, right? What you really are doing here is you are trading something that works for political protection, right? In a large company, that's pretty much all. Now, the question is, why would somebody trade? Why would somebody give up political, capital to protect you for something that works? And that's because in a large company, a working piece of software is currency, right? Because in general, nothing works. So if you have something that works, it's currency, it's gold, so you can use it effectively. And so the reason you need to be careful when something is working, and actually people now know about this, it's no longer some sort of a secret project, is because there's going to be two lines of people, right, lined up, right, looking at you. The first line is going to be those people whose jobs you're threatening directly, right? And the second line is going to be a line of people who want to take credit for your work. And in order for you to survive is you need to basically what you need to do is, okay, they're coming for you. They're going to take you down, right? And the reason they're going to take you down, I don't mean to sound too dramatic, it's because in America, self-preservation, it trumps everything else, right? And this is kind of because, this is the reason, right? Why some companies, you know this, large companies make insane decisions. They come out with something that makes no sense. That's the reason. It's because of self-preservation. It's because of some insane political war that resulted in an impossibility, a product impossibility. But because self-preservation trumps everything else, you end up with insane products occasionally. So this is where this petty political battle begins, right? And what's important, once again, is that you really need to have that air cover. You really got to have this guy looking after you, because if you don't, right, and you fail, you're going to get fired. You need insurance, essentially. However, one thing to remember is that it is your job to fight the battle. It's your job to fight the battle. Don Corleone is not going to fight the battle for you, doesn't care. It's just insurance, right? For an example, our example with 8x8, even though we had great political coverage, right, they bought us. The senior leadership of the company knew about us, but they didn't know what we were working on. We were fighting the petty political battles on our own. We never had to file the insurance claim, right? We were really close a couple times, really, really close, but we never had to do this. However, it gave us courage, right? Just kind of psychological courage that, if push comes to shove, we can go to the CEO and, start. It's important, I think. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I think it's important. All right, so how do you win? You win by basically partnerships, right? You create alliances, because who's going to win with your new thing once you replace the JVM that doesn't work? Support, customers, engineers, executives, technical managers, everybody's going to win. Everyone whose jobs you're not directly threatening is going to win, right? Which is most people in the company. You create alliances with those people. And what your goal is to make it look like what you just did is an inevitability, that it's going to happen, right? And once you're here, you're essentially home free, right? You're, 1 second, right. Just to drive the point home, to win the battle, you have to become a politician, right? Or find a partner who is one. And you kind of need to be that guy a little bit, all right? So that's the petty political war that you have to fight. Now, let's say it's there. You've replaced the JVM, it's in production, right? At this point, the last thing you want to do is relax. This is going to be the worst thing for you to do, is to relax once your thing is in production. Because you have two topics that are outstanding, that are really important. Operations and recruiting, right? In terms of operations, it's understandable, right? Because if you have something into production, if it's in production and you're the only person who knows how it works, eventually you're going to run into some troubles. But basically, you got to figure out operations on your own. No one's going to help you at the company because no one's seen Beam, Elixir, Erlang. They don't know what it is, right? Also, you're running in the cloud. They're not running in the cloud. You got to figure this out. Find somebody who knows. Read the internet. What saved our ass, and Peter can tell you more about this, is Terraform, right? Terraform is a way for you to define your infrastructure in code, where basically, if you need to recreate your entire production environment from scratch very quickly, all you have to do is run a script that is configured. So it makes it really, really easy. And it totally saved our ass. I think if we hadn't ended up using Terraform, we would have not been able to really handle our deployments. And if you can't handle your deployments, it means you can't iterate quickly, which means you'll end up, in the world of Visper sooner or later. So if your service is supposed to scale, right? Some services don't have to scale, but if it is supposed to scale, you should figure out a way to run a stress test and basically set up, make sure that it can support 10x, 100x the expected load, set up a meeting, invite all these Java engineers, and then it's a really good, showing really nice graphs and really nice metrics is a really good excuse for explaining to the Java engineers that Java was written to run in the browser, right, as Java applets. And don't forget to tell them that now Java is owned by Larry Ellison, and he's on his way to, ask for royalties. It's really important. So one of the biggest mistakes that Peter and I made when we first launched launched our service is we sort of assumed that it was never going to go down. Right? That was we did assume. How could it go down? But it did. And it did twice, about a month apart, with multi-hour outages. First time, I was flying from New York to San Francisco. It was like at the beginning of the flight that it happened. And Peter was driving in the mountains for 4 hours with no cell reception. And the second time, we were both on Europe to San Francisco flight. Somehow that happened, maybe. So to avoid this, set up PagerDuty with like escalation policies, all the contacts, alerting, on-call rotation. Even if you have 2 people, set it up preemptively. Had we done that, we probably wouldn't have ended up with those outages. And this is also a political thing, right? People will rejoice when this new thing is going down because you just took somebody's jobs away and now they're working on something boring. Who knows, right? You will still have enemies even if you've succeeded replacing the JVM. So the final suggestion is put together a handbook that basically explains as much as you can put in there. Production access, where the code is hosted, how deployments work, talk about Terraform, whatever you can do, put it in there. How to look at the logs, how to read the logs, where to find the logs, maybe even some troubleshooting scenarios. But this handbook is actually ammunition for you when the engineering ops, the big engineering ops, are going to come to you and be like, "What are you doing?" And you're just giving them this operations book, and everyone's going to be like, "Okay, that's great. You have an operations handbook. That's great." And then the other thing is it's ammunition for new hires, right? So let's talk about recruitment because that's the second thing you have to do. And you have 2 sources of people to recruit from. You've got internal recruiting. These are people who already work at your company, right? Now, most engineers are going to be terrified of you after you've replaced the JVM, and they're going to be terrified of your Erlang atrocity. But there's going to be some people who are going to be like, "Oh my God, why is this working? How's this possible, right? And in like 2 months, how is this possible?" Sell OTP to those people hard, right? And the best way to do this is take this person, use the remote shell to connect to a running production cluster, and then inspect the state of a running process, right? Show this to a Java person, and they're going to join your team, right? You can write some helper functions to make the output really nice. But that's pretty much all it's going to take because you're Gandalf, right? You're Gandalf. Of course, people are they're going to join you. The second source of engineers is external recruiting, right? These are people on the street looking for work. I think right now it's not advisable to require OTP, Erlang, Elixir experience. It's not advisable. There aren't enough people who are skilled enough in that world to really come work for you, especially if you're not one of the companies that everybody talks about in good ways. So don't require that experience, make it optional, and then just look for good engineers, right? Because especially since you already have a working system, it doesn't take that much to get someone to just come up to speed. You can start with small problems and then kind of go from there. Also, don't hire people in the Bay Area. Good people will leave because they're going to want more money, and then the bad people are going to stay. And you're going to just end up with a bunch of bad people in the end. So hire everywhere but the Bay Area for now. At the end of the day, right, your goal is to make yourself redundant, right? What you want to do is you want to kind of almost like be out of work because you have nothing to do, right? And the way to do this, and again, if you don't do it, you're going to fail. Eventually, you're going to fail. You've got to make yourself redundant. And the only way to do this is to scale your team, to scale yourself, right? And you do this by continuous recruiting. And that's really hard, but you kind of have to do this. So let's see, 2 more things. First, the second JVM system you're going to be replacing, right, is going to be way easier because you have amassed enormous implicit political capital. Maybe you even got a raise. It's unlikely, but it's possible that you even got some title. It's unlikely, but it's possible, right? But you have a lot of implicit political capital. You can replace the second JVM system with a lot less resistance. And third, if you went through this tutorial, okay, at your job, and you failed, and you got fired, come talk to me because we'll hire you. You have a job. Any questions? You know who this is, right? Bruno, Giordano Bruno. He was like, come on, the earth spins around the world. And they're like, how about we burn you at the stake? You're threatening our jobs. And they burnt him at the stake. And he was right. So don't get burnt at the stake, even though you're right. Be careful. It's not worth it.
This is the best talk so far. I just have a comment for hiring.
Yeah.
In my experience, best airline engineers come from physicists and mathematicians. So I'm hiring them out of university. They're the best. Don't get computer science people.
You know, computer science, so overrated. You know, I absolutely agree. Math, physics, which is, I think Arnold has a degree in computer science.
Chemical engineering is great.
Chemical.
Yeah.
Now, the more you go into hardcore engineering, just keep this in mind, the less likely you are to have implicit political leverage. Just saying, right? So you may want some computer scientists who are dabbling in management to, replace the JVM. Because even if you're really good, and you love Elixir, and you're really good in Erlang, and it's fantastic, and you're just sitting there like fixing the JVM, what's the point, right? So I think you need a good mix of people, some of whom are, looking for petty political battles to win.
I'm going to say just hire musicians. They all need jobs.
Musicians, yeah.
Anybody but computer science.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, you answered it.
Okay.
So is there anything on the technical side after the fact, after you haven't gotten fired, to use as leverage? Like, I'm thinking garbage collection or zero downtime.
No, people still don't care.
So-
No,
so
they
it
don't
doesn't
care. No,
matter.
it doesn't matter. No.
You don't have all of these things, and then job people will come in and take your company over and fire you.
That's an extreme case, but nobody cares. Yeah. I mean, look, we write Erlang not because it's the only way to do things. If you have enough money and you have enough people, they will do whatever you want, right? In assembly language and PHP, they'll do whatever you want. We build in Erlang because it's the right thing to do, right? Because it's beautiful. You can't explain it to those people who count money. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why it works. 100 people, 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, if there's enough money to kind of make the machine work, who cares? PHP, whatever, Java. Those things are irrelevant, right? The question is, look, we have this beautiful thing, Erlang, right? Erlang VM. It's insane that nobody knows, like people generally don't know about this, right? How do we get it into companies? How do we get people to use it? It's really hard. It's hard because they don't care, right? So you got to fight petty political battles.
So, do you think this kind of strategy will work with any other language? Any other, like...
What do you mean?
Like Go or whatever. Rust or Haskell.
I don't know. I think that I don't think any language other than Erlang today is like a reasonable choice for a back-end service that's supposed to, manage a lot of connections or whatever. I just don't think anything else. And it's really because of two things. It's because of this remote shell thing I talked about, right? It's really easy to figure out what's wrong compared to other languages. Try doing it in Go. Try doing it in Haskell. You will fail. It will not work. And two, it's error handling, right? I mean, really, Erlang is way better than any other language in error handling. It's much easier to build systems that are defensible, that are kind of, even if they do fail, they fail in ways that are kind of recoverable. And no other system today can come even close. And the reality is it's going to take 30 years, right? And like an Ericsson-sized, elephant to make another system like this. Everything we're doing, we're just basically standing on the shoulders of these giants who spent their entire professional lives building this thing. Essentially, I mean, I don't think they're getting rich off of it or anything, right? Yeah, I don't think it could. Maybe it could work with another language, right? But at the end of the day, what are we talking about, right? I think if we're talking about beauty, It's not going to work out. Even if it's a system written in Go, it'll probably still end up being pretty ugly. You know, just that's my guess.
There was a question.
Yeah.
Mentioning people whose jobs are being threatened by
Yeah.
the JVM. Did you find any of them were willing to learn Erlang?
No, but we have a really good reason for it, which is actually scary, because most of our developers are in Romania, in a town called Cluj-Napoca. It's a small town, very, very pretty. And the issue there is that Romania has an outsourced economy as far as programming is concerned. So every single developer you're going to find in Romania either is or was at some point an outsourced developer, sometimes for many years. And the number one concern for people who build outsourced stuff, right, is making sure that their skills are relevant, right? So they're not going to start learning Elixir until Larry Ellison buys it, basically, somehow, right? Manages to figure out a way to buy Elixir. That's the problem, right? We're talking an extreme late adopters. But like in San Jose, like Murali, for example, right? We weren't threatening his job, but he found it interesting and he joined our team. He was doing JavaScript before, right? I don't know. There are some people in Cluj who are interested, but it's really hard, right? Because they're like, well, they said it was Java. They told us it was Java. So we're going to do Java. And that's the way it works. No one got fired yet, though. I think they're building some other bullshit thing in JVM now.
So, could you give us more about receiving challenges, applications, and where that is being
Yep.
good for this? But what about other products? SaaS, enterprise SaaS?
I don't think it matters. I think what matters is error handling, ease of deployment, ease of introspection. I think those problems are scalable to any other domain, really. And also, we don't just do messaging. So actually what we started doing is in messaging. First, when we showed up, we're like, hey, let's do messaging. And then it turned out that they couldn't deliver notifications to phones. There was no edge delivery service because it was using XMPP that didn't work. So the first thing we did was we actually deployed this thing with no messaging, but in a way that it would deliver pieces of data to people's phones, right? So this is not a messaging-related problem, right? It's any Internet of Things application. I mean, anything that involves a lot of concurrency is applicable, and like it's basically the internet, right? So I don't think it has anything to do with messaging. Messaging is just a really easy. If you're going to be working on a messaging system, you almost have to like fight yourself to not build it in Erlang. You have to be like stupid to not build it in Erlang, right? But some of these other domains, I think Erlang is perfectly applicable. When I say Erlang, I don't mean just Erlang. I mean Elixir. I'm talking about the virtual machine. Question?
So on the recording side, you said that Java, right, all the time.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of page in the job description. Or if you know Ruby, just come up with it. That's it. But I think it's just syntax-wise.
I don't mean Java. When I say Java, I don't mean Java, right? It's just a really easy target because it's so ridiculous. Anything, Python, Ruby, especially Ruby. Ruby is great because Elixir maps really well. .NET, anything, any sort of especially if it's a virtual machine, if it's a VM that failed. .NET is a kind of a failed VM because it didn't implement the stuff that Elixir did, Erlang did. Same with Java. And Java was never even built for this. It was built for browser applets. It was never designed for back-end engineering. It's just a coincidence, a sad coincidence that it happened. I love Java. Say again?
Same thing with Node.js.
Same thing with Node.js. Exactly, exactly the same thing, except even worse because it's not even like doesn't sit on top of all the CPUs unless you use cluster or something. All right. And if you have any other questions, you can find me on Twitter. My handle is ABS. I think there's one more slide. The trick is to always put the first slide last in your presentation, because if your talk was good, then people will want to look you up. But if it sucked, it doesn't matter. They will have forgotten the first. There it is. 3-letter handle. Can you believe this? This is how you know I'm a San Francisco native.
Great. We'll give another
Thanks.